Hey, welcome back. Let's complete our conversation here on evaluating feedstuffs for farm livestock. As we left off before our time out there, we talked about wet chemistry feed analysis. And so this section, let's finish up our conversation on that component of this section and talk about NIR. NIR is near infrared reflectance spectroscopy, easy for me to say, right? And what it does is it's just a simple desktop machine that measures light absorption and reflection on the feed stuff that you have. So essentially what you do is you grab a sample of feed, you grind it into very small particle size, just like what you would for wet chemistry, and then you take that sample, insert it into the machine, and it just shoots beams of light through it and compares then the absorption or reflection of those light rays to a database that it has, which of course needs to be updated and carefully calibrated fairly often in order to give you good results. The advantage of NIR is it's pretty cheap and very fast. You can get measurements in about 3 minutes, and you can get all measurements in one operation essentially. Very different than that wet chemistry one that I showed you on the last slide, which is many different testing methods, be done in different procedures, probably in different components of the lab. This one does one operation, you get your full nutrient response right away. The problem with NIR is it's not nearly as accurate as wet chemistry. So there's a high, especially on some of the minerals, can be a really high degree of variability with minerals and vitamins. Vitamins are very, very inaccurate. We can have some real problems with carbohydrate sensitivities and carbohydrate accuracy when we talk about NIR readings. It can give you something to work off of. If you don't need an expensive analysis, it will do just fine. You just have to be cautious that you don't, you probably would not want to use this on a milking cow diet or a pig diet where you're making a major change. But it is available if you just want to get a reading on what your feed is worth. Okay, so we transition and think about some other things here in terms of nutrient expression. First, as we start on the left of the slide here, and we're going to practice some of these conversions in class, but talk about dry matter. And generally speaking, when we talk dry matter and talk feed expression and building rations, we're going to talk in terms of dry matter and as fed. Dry matter is the most accurate method because it removes the variability of moisture or water in the feed, and that's how it's expressed in most reports. And especially in ration balancing programs, it's the most utilized feed fraction expression in balancing rations. That way we don't have to worry about how water or moisture might make it difficult on maintaining accuracy. As fed is, of course, the amount of nutrient as the animal would consume it. But of course, water can be variable. You can have corn silage that's 35% dry matter and 38% dry matter and 42% dry matter, sometimes all on the same farm and perhaps even being fed at the same time. And that creates some issues when balancing rations. And the least used of these three is the air dry expression, which is very, very infrequently used, but you might find it on a report from time to time. If you don't see it expressed, it's assumed at 90% dry. We're going to practice some of these conversions in class and doing those quick calculations. But generally speaking, if you're going from as fed to dry matter, the number should go down. If you're converting backwards from dry matter to as fed, the number should go up, just as a general rule of thumb. All right, let's talk briefly about feeding trials. I referenced them earlier in terms of a method of testing. Their purpose is to inform the acceptance or performance of a feed from time to time. Most of these would be performed, of course, in university research settings where we're really trying to get a handle on how a feed might act or perform or how an animal accepts it. The first step is to test the feed. We want to know what is in the feed to begin with. Then we're going to feed a measured amount, sometimes over at constant rates over a long period of time. And then we're going to collect the fecal material and test it as well. We're probably going to collect the urine and test it as well because we want to figure out then the disappearance is apparent digestibility. In addition, we can use feed markers. There's ways that we can test feeds at different steps of the digestive tract in what we call in vivo testing. So essentially, we can put feed components in a tea bag, insert them in an animal, mark it, and figure out what fraction of that feed disappears, or what fraction of that nutrient, more specifically, disappears at different stages of the digestive system. It's very interesting how they can report that out, because it helps you create a lot more accuracy in your feeding program. Of course, there are some options with this. We can do what we call metabolism stalls, where an animal has a specific place that they may eat, or a Kalin door, whereas the animal wears a transponder that only corresponds to one certain door in the barn that animal can then open up and like a key and get in and eat. And I asked the question at the bottom, what are the risks for error here? Of course, anytime we're talking about a human interaction, we can have error there. We can have animals that don't perform or get sick during the feeding trial and therefore confound our results. So there's a number of different things that come into play here. But feeding trials are nonetheless important, but mainly for research purposes, not so much for practical on-farm testing and performance of feeds. Again, very busy slide here. We're going to talk about feedstuff energy a little bit more specifically. Two different fractions that are on the slide. Now, we'll start at the left side of the slide. You'll see energy expressed as TDN, or total digestible nutrients. This is a calculated number, so not necessarily tested all the time. Maybe one tested fraction, and then the rest of it is all calculated out. These TDN does not count for losses of digestion, so heat and fecal material and things of that gas that is generated during the digestion process. TDN does not account for that, so therefore it tends to overestimate the amount of energy in a feed. It's somewhat variable, but it's easy to calculate in a ration. We'll actually use it quite frequently. Just for beginners, it's a nice one to utilize because it's easy to do mathematically, and it starts to give you a handle on how to balance rations from an energy perspective. It's usually expressed in pounds, percent, or kilograms, and we'll use the first two primarily. Then we got the more accurate way of expressing energy in feeds is the gross energy system. So we start with what we call gross energy, or total potential energy of a feed, expressed in calories, kilocalories, or megacalories. We'll subtract off the amount of energy that comes out in the fecal material, so the undigested feedstuffs. That gives us what we call the digestible energy, or DE, and accounts for a little bit of losses of digestion from the fecal material. Then we're going to subtract off the gaseous products of digestion, which is generally speaking methane or acetone, both of those two. And primarily we're talking about ruminants here. Pigs make, of course, some methane, but cows make much more of it, and so we have to subtract off those fractions. We'll also subtract off urinary energy, so we want to capture that and subtract that fraction off. That leaves us with what we call metabolizable energy. Here's now where we're starting to get to the point where we might actually utilize something from a ration balancing perspective. If we're talking ruminants, we're going to again subtract off that heat increment. When we're digesting off, when we're testing a feed, and whenever an animal ruminates, heat is a byproduct of that breakdown. And so we want to make sure and figure out how much energy it requires the animal to get rid of that heat. And so what we're left then is net energy fraction. And so this is where we're really starting to get to where we can get very, very specific in terms of what is left for an animal to utilize from a performance perspective. The net energy fraction can be further broken down. NEM is net energy for maintenance, and that is essentially about half of all the feed that an animal needs. Maintenance requirements must be met first. And so that cow or that horse or that pig, she'll dedicate all nutrients for maintenance first, and then other production factors like net energy for gain if we're trying to put on weight, or net energy for lactation if we're trying to make milk. So applications by species, how might we use them? Well, horses, TDN or metabolizable energy, either one of those would be okay. Beef, TDN might be fine, but certainly net energy for maintenance and net energy for gain would be much, much more accurate. Dairy cows are going to primarily use maintenance, lactation, and gain. They're going to leave TDN completely out of the picture. Pigs, primarily ME and DE, and I forgot to put on here net energy. They're going to get to those fractions much more specifically. Sheep, TDN will work if we're talking about just some backyard lambs and so forth, metabolizable energy or net energy. And poultry, perhaps a TDN if we're talking about just some layers in the backyard, but probably ME, DE, and net energy for those. Kind of getting towards the end of this section here, we certainly have to think about physical evaluation. Like how might we just do some basic visual appraisal? If we're going to go out and buy some hay, for example, we want to be able to know just kind of what we're looking for. The color of it, we want it nice and green. Certainly no black and slimy spots or mold looking stuff. We want to be able to kind of visually appraise the amount of leaves that are there and be able to identify any weeds that might be in that product. You want to be able to just kind of estimate palatability. Do you think they're going to eat it? Very simply, it's no use in buying something that an animal that you're buying it for won't consume. And then some value considerations: the growing conditions that it came through, the harvest stage. At what stage did they chop or cut it or bale it? Maturity, processing, and storage. All of those speak to the quality of the feed that you may be considering purchasing. So you want to have a decent idea how to do some visual appraisal. We're also going to do some cost per unit of nutrient calculation. So as we determine some value on the nutrient basis, we're going to learn how to do that in the classroom as well. And I put the equation briefly down here at the bottom of the screen. It will also be in your notes. So some take-home messages for this particular unit here. Again, proper evaluation of feedstuffs is really, really crucial for ration formulation. If we're not going to do ration formulation, we're feeding on what I call by guess and by golly. You're just guessing how many coffee cans or scoops of this and that, and you really have no roadmap to success, comfortable and confident roadmap to success on feed performance. Proper sample collection is super critical. If we start with a crappy sample, you're going to get crappy results and inconsistent and data that's not informative at all. And then understanding the nutrient profile of your feed, it's going to give managers a great chance to accurately and economically build rations that'll work, they'll perform, they'll keep animals happy and healthy, and you'll get the most bang for your buck. So thanks for tuning in to this Unit 2. I'll look forward to working through this content and getting at our case study in class.